From cover to cover, the Bible is filled with many, many stories of miracles. There are 4 alone surrounding Elisha. We look into Exodus, filled with the majority of all the miracle stories. Into the New Testament, over and over again, Jesus healing, Jesus lifting up, Jesus transforming. In our gospel today, John alone, 2 miracle stories. We hear of the multiplication. We hear of Jesus walking out on the water when the disciples feared. Miracles. Do they still exist today? How many people, do they still exist today? See, not all the hands are going up, and yeah, they do, yeah. I mean, last week we were talking about healing, and I asked, does healing happen today? Yeah, and we went around and some people spoke about healings that they had felt in their lives, healings that they had seen in their lives. Miracles. Probably the best definition I've ever heard of miracle is the extraordinary that happens through the ordinary. The extraordinary that happens through the ordinary. And what makes someone able to see that there is a miracle? Hands went up and people nodded. What is it that allows some of you, and I know in my short lifetime, to have seen and experienced miracle? What is it? Faith. Faith. It's a certain attitude. It's a certain way of looking at things. Even in the midst of darkness, we can have those eyes that are attuned, that heart that is aligned, that soul that is connected to spirit that allows us to see and to move forward. Even in times when what might appear to some as total darkness and destruction, it can be transformed into light and into victory. The readings today that speak of the feeding, and there's no doubt that there's connection between the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes and Elisha and the miracle story of the feeding. And it's meant to lift people up and to lead them forward. There's no doubt that multiplication happens. Did you hear what Jesus said in the beginning? Or what John said in the beginning of the gospel? That this happened during the time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's the Passover feast. It's one of the 4 major times that Jews traveled to Jerusalem. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands. Like coming down the stretch for the lobster, mini lobster. Right? Thousands upon thousands. People in Jerusalem knew to have their food and be home. Any of us who lived in the Keys for a little bit of time, no, we don't venture out. We don't venture out. And we have what we need during this time as we're here. This was major festival time. The Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Passover. Which ultimately Jesus will celebrate with his disciples. And out of that will come a special gift. But it has to be seen with faith. The gifts of God for the people of God. Take them in remembrance that Christ died for you, and feed on them in your hearts with thanksgiving, right? We're going to say that a little later in our liturgy. Feed on them in your hearts with thanksgiving. Gifts of God for the people of God. This coming together in these readings today, no coincidence that it's that time of Passover. That multiplication is going to happen in a way magnificent That's going to cause some to try to just say, oh yeah, he's Messiah, let's make him king. And that's why he has to slip out. That's why he exits. And then they get to the point where he's with his disciples later. They're not even going to understand fully. They're not going to understand even when he shares that Passover meal with them. They're not going to understand even immediately after his death, resurrection, and ascension. It's going to take time. Because that faith needs to be nurtured. That faith that can help us to see things that maybe are something else. I remember the first time I preached on the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes was as a seminarian in Baltimore, Maryland. As a seminarian in Baltimore, Maryland. And I went to Baltimore, Maryland that summer to work in a church. And when I got there, it was very interesting. When I got there, 2 days later, and most of my congregation knows and others, I'm former Roman Catholic priest. So I was a Roman Catholic seminarian at the time. And when I was there a couple of days, the pastor called me into his office. He called me into his office and he said, Tom, he said, I have to share something with you. He said, I didn't plan it this way. He said, but I've been going through a lot. He said, and I'm taking a leave. I'm considering, perhaps not remaining as a Roman Catholic priest. He said, and I feel horrible because this is happening when you're here for the summer. And I said, hey, you have to do what you have to do, and, God bless you, and, went my way. Well, end of the week, the assistant calls me into his office. Tom, I didn't plan it this way. Yeah, believe it or not, his co-pastor, also is taking a leave. So that summer, a supply priest came in to assist, and the seminarian was there. Well, the bottom line was, what seemed to be something for someone else turned into something else for me. I did more preaching that summer than I ever would have done. I did more ministering in certain ways, shapes, and forms than I ever would have done as a seminarian. The Lord transformed something that looked one thing into something else. And he does that over and over again. What is the miracle in our gospel today? I remember studying and studying and studying and preparing and preparing and preparing for that homily, because that was the first homily I gave in that parish. And clearly something happened. Magnificent, extraordinary, transforming. Because we hear it in all of the Gospels. Or 3 of the Gospels we hear it in. And in 3 of the Gospels we also hear this coming together, not always in the same storyline, but this fear of the disciples on the water, and Jesus calming it, and then moving forward. Jesus taking the darkness and making it light. Taking the trials and transforming them in ways that we could not understand sometimes. I remember studying and studying and preparing, and some of the commentaries spoke about, what if this was the feast of unleavened bread, Passover? Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people came to Jerusalem. My wife and I are going on vacation next week. Do you think we're going to prepare properly? I hope so. Do you think we're going to bring enough food with us while we're away, because we're going to stay somewhere for 2 weeks? I hope so. We're going to do all the human planning we need to make that trip appropriate. Some of the commentaries spoke about how, and John says 5,000 people sat down. 5,000 people sat down, and they were fed. They were fed with a few loaves and a few fishes. They got multiplied. Miracle. Miracle. What was the miracle? Was the miracle clearly Jesus blessing, breaking, and distributing, and it becoming thousands upon thousands so that 12 baskets remain? Could it also have been that a lot of these people were traveling and they had food. They had provisions. And did Jesus look out and look into their eyes when they sat down? They were going to hoard what they had. They were going to use for themselves what they had brought. But did Jesus' compassionate, loving eyes touch their hearts, touch their minds, touch their souls, so that they shared? They shared from what they had. They shared from the little that they had, and they shared from the abundance of what they had. But they shared. What is the miracle? And what is a miracle? Many of us, most of us have said we attest to it, we have seen it. And it happens in the ordinary, but it is extraordinary. And shortly we will come around this altar. We've heard, do not be afraid. We will come around this altar and we will receive a miracle. Because we would have taken bread and wine. We would have said blessing and we're going to distribute. And that will nourish us. But it needs to nourish us to be able to go out and to share and to be instruments of miracle making this day and each day of our lives.